And Jacob, you have three books out, is that right?
That is correct.
You have the Book of Apparitions, Daughter of Man, and The Unwelcome. And these are all genres that I'm really a heavy reader in, so I'm
Oh,
really
yeah.
excited for this interview.
Well, this will be a
But
lot of fun for both of us.
yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Sure. The very first one, the Book of Apparitions, I began writing in college when I was a freshman. And originally it began just as a short story that became the first chapter of the book. And the book is actually a short story cycle. You can read any of the four chapters entirely separately without reading any of them. They function independently as short stories, but if you put them together, it creates this richer tapestry of a narrative, and it ended up being my honors project was finishing this book, and then it got picked up for publication by this really small press. I was their first book, and that was what began my career as a writer and as an author. And it was really cool to have something like come out like just out of college like that. Like it really cemented me then as where I wanted to be. And so after that was Daughter of Man. And that one, kind of like the first one, was almost an accident. Again, that began as like a little rinky dink short story. And then I kept adding to it and adding to it and adding to it. And then all of a sudden, it was 36,000 words long and I was almost done. And it was like, crap, I have a book again. Um, I guess I'll try and publish this. And again, it came out, and at that point it wasn't a fluke anymore. I was publishing. I was published. I was an author at that point. Um, and by that point, I had really just dabbled in fantasy. Like the book of apparitions is magical realism. It's grounded in our world, but it's still has that magical bent to it. Daughter of Man was entirely dark fantasy, entirely a world separate from ours. Um, but The Unwelcome, the book that came out just yesterday, that was my first purposeful attempt at novel writing. It's got the actual structure of the novel. It did not come about by accident. It's got like chapters and it had a plan. And um, because of that, it's definitely the one I'm most proud of. I think it's definitely my best so far. And I'm very excited to see what the people out there think of it when they get their hands on it.
Absolutely. Now, it's funny that you said that you used a story structure outline with your latest book because I always love to stress to writers that you're going to have a different writing plan not only than other writers, but you're going to have a different writing plan for each book that you write. It really depends on the story. So,
Mm-hmm.
how did writing your last book really differ from your first two books? How was that writing process different, more difficult, less difficult for you? What was that like?
Um, the biggest difference to me was I was attempting something I had not ever attempted before, and that was writing from multiple perspectives. The Unwelcome is my first book to have a female protagonist. It's the first book to have all those multiple viewpoints. Pretty much every named character in the book gets at least one chapter that tells their part of the story. So I had to change my style a lot. Like, all of these people needed voices and they all needed personalities and they all needed to feel like the hero for at least a few pages. And it was a struggle at first. It was something I had never done before. And I had to really drill down and plan and think about who all these people actually are because they had to feel real. And if they didn't feel real to me, they're certainly not going to feel real to you out there, whoever you are.
Absolutely. I mean, you can definitely tell a flat character that just relies on your basic stereotypes versus your well-rounded characters that you can really get to know, that you really can relate to. And I think that's what I always look for the most when I'm reading a novel is I look for a character in the novel that I personally can relate to so that it kind of helps carry me through the entire story structure.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were writing this latest novel, were you writing every day? Did you only write when you were inspired? What was that process like? How did you fit that into your schedule?
At the time, I was actually working at a publishing house. So, I wasn't able to write like during the day. I would have to like, put in my 8 hours editing other people's work and then kind of flip that switch and all right, now we're in creative mode. Now we're working on this. And to be completely honest, like, towards the beginning of I did have like a pretty set schedule. Like, all right, I'm gonna work, and then like the 2 hours after that, that's for me. Uh that's for the unwelcome. But towards the end of it, and this tends to happen with almost everything I write, is like if I'm working on a longer project, the last 6 chapters or so, I will write in a feverish white heat. And at the end of it, like I'll have a book and I won't know where it came from, where the last bit came from. So I'll just be so in flow and so just like fever brained, white hot oriented towards this project that it'll happen and it'll kind of happen almost on autopilot.
Hey, that's a good way to write a book.
You would think, but then you get like a hangover afterwards
Oh,
almost.
I'm
Like,
sure.
like especially when I was writing like Daughter of Man, when I was finished, like I wrote until about 5 in the morning, those last like couple thousand words, and I was sick for like 2 days afterwards. I just pushed myself too hard.
Right. I mean, it takes a lot of energy, especially when you're that focused and you're that kind of involved in this whole other world that you're writing in. You kind of neglect different little things, sleeping, eating, drinking, those kind of things, and
Mm-hmm.
it can definitely cause that kind of hangover feeling. But I
Mm-hmm.
love that you also worked at a publishing company, so you literally had to switch mindsets from editing other people's work to going home and being the writer and writing your own work in a very quick amount of time. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I know for me, a lot of what I struggle with is kind of turning off those different mindsets. I tend to write and edit and revise and everything at the same time. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I never get anywhere. But so how did you change that mindset? Was it just a change in scenery, going from work to home? What really helped you there?
Um, I would literally like do like a full, almost like a physical reset. Like, all right, I was working from home because it was a remote position. You know, I would close whatever document I was editing for somebody else. I would get up. I would like make a lap around the outside of the house and come back. And that was new Jacob. That's writing for personal pleasure, Jacob. And that seemed to that physical reset seemed to do the trick.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see how that would work. So you have a one specific writing space in your house that you write that you also work from home at, or do you have a different place where you write versus where you work?
These days, I'm in a different job now. I'm working at an office, so and that separation also helps. Like, when I'm at the office, that's for the job. Obviously, that I can go home, park the car, go up to my room where my actual desk is, and that's the creative center at that point.
Gotcha. I always find it difficult. I don't have that one specific place where I write. So I kind of have to just change mindsets as I go wherever I'm at when I have the time to write. And it can be really difficult
Hmm.
when you don't have that one specific space. So as far as the writing process goes, did you have a part specifically that was more difficult for you to really get involved in as far as world building or character development or anything like that?
The world, at least, of the Unwelcome is a fairly familiar one. Something that a lot of people might not know is that the Book of Apparitions and the Unwelcome do take place in the same continuity, even though they're not expressly sequels. But there's a university and a couple of other locations and a couple of other characters who are either related or repeated across the two books. So the setting itself was fairly easy to get back into. I had spent my entire college career writing in that setting, so that was uh, fairly easy to revisit and rekindle to a certain extent. But as far as the characters go, that became a little more difficult because again, I was writing from a perspective that was very much not my own. I was writing a lot of female characters for the first time, and that took some effort and some kind of like re-engineering of the way I thought about these characters. Um, the character of Riley Loomis, especially, who's her first POV chapter is chapter 5, and figuring out what made her different, what would make her fun for the audience to read about was especially difficult for me for whatever reason. And I like how she turned out, and it turns out that she's kind of become a fan favorite of a lot of people who have read the book so far. But at the time when I first began working on her, the main character had such a strong opinion of what she thought Riley was. I was actually having difficulty seeing past her biases about her, and I had to kind of again kind of recenter my thinking about this character, or she would have come across very bland and almost very cartoonish in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of writers may not realize how difficult that is in the beginning, really putting yourself in your character's shoes, especially when they're a different gender than you, or if they have a completely different viewpoint as you. I think that a really good way to challenge yourself is to purposely create characters that look at the world in a completely different way that you do, where they have a drastically different opinion on something as you do, because that helps you grow as a writer, but also as a person. And I think that anything you can do to grow yourself as a writer is extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, you've been writing for quite a while now, and you have 3 books out. But do you still challenge yourself as a writer? Do you still try to use different writing prompts or try to write in different genres?
Oh, most certainly. It honestly it still doesn't quite feel real to me yet. Like I still consider myself to be an amateur even after 3 books, and so like I'm constantly looking for ways to improve. Looking for ways to shake up what I'm doing because I never want to get stale. Like I never want to keep doing the same thing. Um, which is why the book I'm working on currently is in an entirely different genre, and the style I'm working in is very different as well. It's much more sparse. It's sharper. It's like I'm writing like a noir murder mystery now, and it reads much more like James Elroy than Jacob Stephen Moore. Honestly, it's very knife edge, like 5 words a sentence, sparse.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's definitely going to be a different perspective, especially when you cross genres. What I've always thought was interesting is being able to kind of combine 2 different genres into one book, and kind of see how those different story plots lay out. Um, so, do you have any goals as a writer right now? You said you're working on another novel, but do you have like anything specific that you are trying to better yourself at, or anything like that?
Um, I actually do have a very specific goal. I want to be adapted. Um, I would like to see my work be something else other than what it is. A play or a movie or a. We're seeing this big resurgence in like prestige television right now. I would love to have like a limited series based on the Unwelcome at some point. Um, I think it would fit, and I think it would be really fun to see like someone else take a stab at you know doing these characters or doing this plot or seeing if they can make it different or improve it even. I never want to be one of these authors that has like very strict control of their work, like books out like this is always going to exist. I want to see what you can do with it.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, when one thing that I always like to express to other writers and the different writers who are watching this, whether they're new at writing or whether they have 3 novels out themselves, is that every person's writing process is different and it's going to change between each book that you write. So, do you have any advice to aspiring writers out there, or anything that you want to make sure every writer understands?
Yeah. I think the first thing that I think every writer should remember is that if you go for too long without reading anything. If you're just writing, your work can become inbred almost, or even like incestuous. Like you start to self cannibalize and become very locked into like one specific way of writing. And the car can keep going downhill with no gas in it. But, once you hit that first hill, if you haven't read anything in a while, if you haven't filled that tank back up, you're going to be stuck in a valley. And I'm going to laugh.
Do you read the same genres that you write, or do you like to mix it up?
I try to do one on, one off. Like when I was writing The Unwelcome, I was reading a lot of horror at the same time I was reading, uh, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of romance as well. So I didn't want it to be just one thing. Like The Unwelcome is definitely a horror novel, but it has a lot of melodrama. It is kind of a romance in the same way. So I didn't want to get locked into like this is horror. It needs to read like Stephen King or Dean Koontz or Neil Gaiman, and I needed it to be fresh, and the pot needed to be mixed up to a certain extent.
Definitely understand that. And I think writers are essentially readers. And if you don't have time to read, you're not really going to have time to write. And you're not going to have the tools to write. I think that's what Stephen King worded it as.
Hmm.
If you don't have the time to read, you're not going to have the tools that you need to write. And I think that is essential for every writer to understand, is that you need to put yourself into the shoes of not only your characters that you're creating, but also your readers, in order to make sure that your book is flowing the way that you want your readers to be able to understand it.
Most certainly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me today. Do you have anything else that you want to put out there? Any information you want to give out on your new book that you're writing?
Um, Not on the new book necessarily, but on the old book. This is the very first one I've ever had that's actually going to be available in stores. You can go get it at your local Barnes and Noble.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jacob. I hope you have a great day.
All right, thank you so much. You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.